Andoni Iraola is set to become the new Liverpool manager. What can he bring? What areas does he need to improve? And can he cope with the pressure? We're joined by Optadata editor Michael Reid to discuss all things Liverpool. Michael, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Yeah, very well, thanks. Quite excited actually about the news that's coming through. So, yeah, quite good, thanks.
I guess there's only really one place to start, the sacking of Arne Slot. Even with the way that the season went, do you think it was still a bit of a surprise?
If you'd have asked me that even a month or two ago, I'd have probably said yes, because, it felt as though, once the club was looking like qualifying for the Champions League, that they were happy to go with that. And obviously, Xabi Alonso became available during the season. Everyone thought, oh, that's the opportunity to maybe make the change. And when they didn't do that, it sort of felt like they're clearly backing Slot. And as the season wore on and on and on, I think it got more to the point. I think Liverpool fans got more to the point thinking, yeah, he is going to be staying and he's going to be backed. So yeah, by the timing of it was a bit of a surprise. I don't think anyone expected it to happen because they thought he'd been backed as the season has gone on. So yeah, I think it was actually a shock. I think if you'd have asked, certainly in November, December time when the mood was very low, I think people would have said, oh no, it's not a shock at all at this point, because there were defeats like the 3-0 home defeat to Forest, the 4-1 defeat to PSV, things like that, where it got quite low really at the club. I don't think it would have been as much as a surprise then as it was now, because they'd backed him through that. So he thought, oh well, now he's qualified for the Champions League, when at one point it looked like he might not do that. So the fact that he sort of got what it felt like the club were the minimum expectations, but clearly something changed, and or maybe they knew that they were going to do it at the end of the season rather than mid-season. It's either of the two things, I suppose.
I suppose the shocking thing from looking outside in was, how do you go from Premier League champions to struggling to qualify for the Champions League? What were the main differences in Arne Slot's first season to his second?
Yeah. Well, the first season he basically didn't sign anyone. He came in and the only signing was for the first team was Federico Chiesa, who only started one Premier League game all season, and that was after Liverpool had wrapped up the title. So basically it was the same team for the previous season. And to be fair, he got a points tally that wasn't too dissimilar to what Klopp got with it the previous season. Klopp got 82 and Slot ended up with 84. So it was a sort of similar. I think what worked was he didn't try to change things too much too quickly. And he worked with what he had, but the tweaks he made, instead, the Klopp team was so gung-ho and so attacking, and certainly that 23-24 season, they averaged over 20 shots a game in the Premier League. They were a very attacking side, high energy, high intensity. He dialed that down a bit to save the players' fitness over the course of the season, but also to have more control and give up less chances at the other end, because there were times under Klopp where they would give up chances, and that really stopped in the 24-25 season, and that's what he got spot on, and he deserves a massive amount of credit, because I'm not sure many managers would have started off so well. I think a lot of other managers would have needed that bedding in period, and teething problems would have been shown. He just hit the ground running and never looked back. They were top of the league pretty early on and just never lost it. So he got an awful lot right. The tweaks to players like Gravenberch's position, he was a sort of bit part player in his first season under Klopp, and suddenly he's Slot's regular starter as a holding midfielder, and he really played well. So he got an awful lot right that season, and he deserves a massive amount of credit for that. And I think that's how history will remember him more for that season than it will this season, that's for certain.
What do you think kind of didn't work this season then? Was there any significant drop-offs in certain areas where maybe Slot struggled?
As I mentioned before there, that last season he dialed down the press, but it was still there. There was still high turnovers were about 8 per game, stats like that. Pass per defensive action around 10.5, that kind of area. But this season it went down again. So the press is reduced yet again. So it's almost, and what also happened was the possession went up. So he's gone from effectively, having a side that had control over games, but also had an energy and a threat to them, to a side that almost wanted too much control over everything and suddenly lost that attacking impetus. That's sort of how I see it. The play became slower. There was less of a press. There was less they were having a lot of the ball but not doing anything with it because they were a bit too slow with the attacking play. As I said, second in the league for possession, which I think they'd be quite happy with, and Jurgen Klopp would be second for possession in a few of his seasons as well. But it was the fact that it wasn't then combined with a press or something to differentiate it from any team that can just keep the ball plastic around the back. There was nothing that really differentiated it. And the other thing was, obviously, the turnover of players was huge from the title-winning season. Trent Alexander-Arnold left, Luis Diaz left. They're probably the two biggest impacts on the team, because Trent Alexander-Arnold was almost like a cheat code for the team, really, in terms of, his passing from the back. If a team tried to press you, well, if you pressed Trent Alexander-Arnold, he would find a pass to beat your press, and suddenly you're exposed in one move. They lost that. They also lost Luis Diaz, who had this incredible ability on the ball to retain possession, and players like that help get you from defence to attack. Whereas this season, I think they just lost that ability to, how do we turn it from defence to attack? They lost that ability to do it in an effective way. They had lots of the possession, but they couldn't break down these low blocks that they so often faced.
Looking ahead to the new manager, Iraola, what are your thoughts on him, and what do you think that he can bring to this team?
I think people really enjoyed watching his Bournemouth team play. So the things that they ranked highly, and they were third for high turnovers in the Premier League this season, third for shot-ending high turnovers, fifth for passive defensive action. So this is Bournemouth we're talking about. We're not talking about one of the teams fighting for the Premier League title. We're talking about a side that's qualified for Europe for the very first time, and he's the one that's taken him there. But the other thing that Bournemouth were top of is direct attacks, where they were top of the league for that, which is basically counter-attacking, moving from defence to attack very quickly, and direct speed. So in other words, how fast up the field you're progressing the ball on average with your sequences. They were top for both of those, and that's because he likes to play the risky, first pass forward kind of football, where you don't play the safe pass, you play the riskier pass. Now, the other thing with Bournemouth is they average around 44% possession, whereas Liverpool are averaging 59% possession this season. So it's a completely different expectation. And that's the question marks. There's two big question marks for me with Iraola. Firstly is how does he do it with a team that's expected to win 90% of their games, where they come into most games as favourite. It's only maybe Arsenal and Man City they play where they won't be the favourite to win a game. So how does his style translate to that? Because there won't be the space to play that direct football necessarily. So how can he adapt to that? And the second is Bournemouth play great football, but they play great football once a week. They don't have European midweek football. Liverpool have Champions League football, as we alluded to. Slot got that qualification. So he will now have to translate that style to Wednesday, Saturday, or Tuesday, Sunday, or whatever it might well be, but it'll be twice a week. Now, he will have a bigger squad at Liverpool than he had at Bournemouth, so he'll have more chances to rotate because they are a bigger club. We've got a bigger wage bill, bigger budget, all of that comes with it. But it's an unknown. We've never seen him. He's only played in Europe with Larnaca in the Cypriot League, which is obviously not comparable to the Premier League. So we have no stats to back up how he rotates in a busy schedule with a European calendar, and we have nothing to back up. He's not competed for major titles, so they're the unknowns, and it's always a risk when hiring a manager like that. But I think Liverpool is a good club for him to find out and answer those questions, because I think that they're a club with patience. I mean, had Slot not won the league in his first season and they'd finished third or fourth, I think Liverpool fans have been okay with that. He exceeded expectations by winning the league. So Iraola, I think, will get time. It was actually because Slot got progressively worse with time, that's what probably backfired on him in the end. So Iraola will get time, and as long as he shows improvement over that time, and as long as he plays a style of football that the fans can get behind, I think that's where he will be measured.
You mentioned style of play there. Do you think there needs to be significant investment for him to make his mark?
Of course. I think the holes in the squad were sort of found out this season. If you look at, I think the glaring thing with Salah going and Ekitike being injured is the depth up front looks very lacking. So certainly needs some attacking depth for starters. You hope that Isak will be able to start more games next season. Gakpo's still there, Wirtz is still there. where it remains to be seen how he'll use maybe Chiesa or Elliott if they stay or go. We don't know. But regardless, the depth isn't enough to play Wednesday, Saturday, as I mentioned. So I think certainly attacking wise, he needs the depth. And the other area I think most Liverpool fans would agree is we need a holding midfield player. Gravenberch and McAllister did it very well in the 24-25 season. But we saw this season their limitations in that position, and maybe that Liverpool do need more of a Fabinho type player. They need to find Fabinho Mark II, who's the 2026 version of Fabinho that Klopp had in his best Liverpool teams. So that's probably what they need. Iraola plays with a double pivot in that Bournemouth team. He plays with the two sitting midfielders, which then allows the fullbacks to go forward, which then allows the attackers to also interchange positions and play with a bit more freedom. And that could really help players like Kirkers and Frimpong, who have probably been a bit almost playing with one hand tied behind the back a bit this season in terms of they've not been allowed to bomb forward maybe as much as Liverpool fans would have hoped. And I think that's because defensive midfielders haven't been there to cover for them, so they've had to cover in other ways. So I think that Iraola, we saw he's had Kirkers before, and Kirkers was in the team of the year for Bournemouth, in the Premier League team of the year. He was left back of the season that season. He was great running down the wing, bombarding down that left hand side. His energy and his enthusiasm and his ability to run with the ball. So I think, yes, he needs the investment, but I also think he'll be able to work with the players that he's got there. Obviously with Konate leaving, they probably look short at centre back. Xhaka is coming in, but he's obviously an under 22 player, so he's a young player. So whether they need that experience, because otherwise you're asking Van Dijk to do an awful lot there in terms of leading that very young back line, with Leone coming back from an injury. Xhaka's been injured as well, with a shoulder injury that he picked up in February. So you're asking a lot of Van Dijk there. And Joe Gomez is in the last year of his deal, and his injury record isn't the best. I think he needs the depth so that he can rotate, because I think that's another thing that Slot possibly didn't do enough of, was rotate and use his bench players as much as he could. You know, Szoboszlai started over 50 games last season. Van Dijk played the most minutes of anyone in Big Five European leagues. You know, he's going to be 35 next season. You don't want him playing the most minutes in next season again. It's not fair on him more than anything. If you want to get the best out of these players, you need to rotate them more. He does. I think that's where Liverpool need. It's not necessarily first team options. It's the depth that they probably need to allow Iraola to then work with that and rotate for the midweek football that he hasn't had to do before.